Hello and welcome to the Arsenal Women Arsecast episode 106 with me, your host Tim Stillman. Couple of Arsecasts came out last week. We released two, even though there wasn't a game. So Jamie and I kind of went over Jonas Eidevall's quotes from his recent round of interviews, and we reacted to the news of Renee Slegers' appointment, albeit we reacted to it 2 days before it was actually confirmed. But we released that on Friday. And then on Saturday, I had the chance to sit down with Renee for 15-20 minutes at London Colney on Friday afternoon. And we wrote that interview up on the site, but also released the audio as a kind of short Arsecast on Saturday morning. So do check that out if you haven't. But we did have a game this weekend. Some football was played. Arsenal came back from their winter break. They beat Crystal Palace 5-0 at home, which was very nice. I'm sure you'll all agree, because I don't think there are any Crystal Palace fans listening to this episode. And here to go over that 5-0 win and maybe some other things as well is Jamie Spanger. Jamie, how are you doing?
Hey Tim, I'm good. I'm still kind of defrosting from yesterday at Meadow Park because it was absolutely Baltic. I got home and I was like, I feel like I need to thaw out. So yeah, I'm cold still, but no, good and excited to unpack a big win.
Yeah, I think like 3 years. In fact, I know exactly when I bought it, right? But I've got this enormous winter jacket, this like huge puffer that I bought. I actually bought it. A bit of a life hack: buy your winter coats during the summer because they're much cheaper. So I remember I actually bought it in like July a couple of years ago, but this enormous black winter coat, which was still quite pricey even though it was on sale. But when you spend a lot of time at Meadow Park in the winter, it really pays off. And I was like, do you know what? I might use this coat for the next 10 years, so I'm going to put down the money for it. And it was pretty impenetrable. It worked in Oslo in -6, so it was a match for the conditions yesterday. But you're right, Jamie, it did get very cold at Meadow Park. But before we go into the game, because it's January and in the spirit of January, I mean, quite a lot of stuff's happening. We reacted already to the manager being finalised and confirmed, but obviously, I mean, we're actually coming towards the end of the January transfer window now, and stuff is happening at multiple clubs. And before we go into the game, I mean, first of all, we should, I think, talk a little bit about Catherine Kuhl, who went to Roma. And that deal was done on Friday, and she actually made her debut for them, and that's a permanent deal. I believe Arsenal getting in the region of €100,000 for that, which I think is a pretty decent price, actually. We've spoken a little bit about Key and how I think the writing's been on the wall for quite a while, but what do you make of that move?
Yeah, I think, Tim, I agree. We all saw it coming for Catherine Kuhl. I think she's a very exciting, bright young talent, and it just feels like for a player like her, it just seems... It just wasn't the right fit at Arsenal as much as fans and the club and maybe her herself would have liked it to be. I think she's playing in one of the most competitive positions in the Arsenal team right now. So look, it wasn't meant to be, and I think a move to Roma is very good. They're a top Italian side, so I'm happy for her, and it's nice to see that she's come in so soon and then made her debut. It means there's a real place for her at that club, because I wish her the best. I think she's going to be a phenomenal footballer. It's just a shame that she's playing in that kind of, where in the midfield does she actually play a role? And I think we've got a few of them in Vic Palova and Kyra Cooney-Cross. So yeah, I wish her all the best.
Yeah, I think not getting really any minutes, even when Victoria Palova was injured, kind of really said a lot about what was going to happen, really. And I think it does kind of say something about how early some of these players make some of these moves. It was quite interesting because it looked for all the world like she was going to go to Everton, which I think would have been a decent move. Brian Sorensen had coached her before, but I do think Roma's a better move. Like they compete at the top of the table in Italy. They play in the Champions League. Like I do think that's probably a better move for her than Everton, albeit Everton are finally investing a little bit more. But I kind of think a change of scenery might be quite good for her. And what about, again, before we go into the game, overall in the WSL, things starting to kind of kick off in the transfer window. We've got Carolyn going to Manchester City. Rumours that Manchester United are interested in taking Chloe Kelly on loan, which would be a really, really interesting. Yeah, and you get this a lot in women's football where there's a slightly smaller band of big clubs. You know, you do get these kind of, Arsenal want Russo on deadline day, and Chloe Kelly might go on loan to Manchester United and all of that. And then there's like Naomi Girma, who looks like she's going to be the first £1 million player in women's football. Like, what do you make of some of the stuff that's going down in the WSL at the moment, January transfer wise?
Yeah, this window has been absolutely hectic. It's not even like there's been a lot of moves made, but I feel like the players we're speaking about are on such a high level. The Chloe Kelly one, if that happens, oh my gosh, I will love that. Just for the lore of the Barclays Women's Super League, I would love to watch Chloe Kelly, who absolutely dunked on them at Old Trafford and made herself known about it, playing in a United shirt on loan. But honestly, if you take like the Derby rivalry out of it, it's probably a strong move for Chloe Kelly. I don't know if United fans are actually too happy, but she needs game time before the Euros. She needs to get to a club. She needs to get to a club that's going to give her minutes, because if she's riding the bench and then inevitably leaves in the summer, that's not setting her up to be picked for the Euros. So she needs to make a move, and I think anything right now is in her best interest. So I'm not surprised that she's open to that. Carolyn, again, I think a lot of Arsenal fans were disappointed to see that news, but honestly, from Man City's point of view, they're getting a brilliant player. They need defenders, though. I'm so confused why they're not going in for defenders. They're buying all these forwards. They bought a Japanese midfielder. Like, they need to buy defenders. Watching that game last night, Rebecca Nack, and maybe people think she's a good player, I just saw like a very similar caliber of footballer to Alana Kennedy out there last night. There were holes everywhere. So, yeah, there's been some interesting moves. And then obviously Naomi Girma, we'll see how that ends up. And much to my dismay, I would love to watch her in the WSL, but perhaps not for Chelsea. But yeah, it's been a lot of big stuff, hasn't it, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel, the Carolyn one, I think upset a lot of Arsenal fans because the thought that she might be in for her. I'll confess, I thought that maybe earlier in January. And that wasn't based on information. That was a bit of speculation on my part. I certainly at that point, I heard from somewhere that Arsenal might go for a winger, which Emily Kill reported in ESPN, and I thought, well, it must be Carolyn, but I looked into it and it wasn't. I don't think there was any concrete interest there really at all at this stage. I think Arsenal were interested maybe 18 months ago, and Naomi Girma as well with Chelsea. Yeah, I'm with you. I kind of think it's going to sound like a silly thing to say and a lot of people aren't going to like it, but I don't think she'd be a fit for Arsenal just because I don't think her and Leah Williamson would be a fit together, and I kind of think you'd have to choose one or the other. Unfortunately, I think she'd be great for Chelsea alongside Millie Brighton. And obviously they have a massive need because Buchanan did her ACL. So, I do tend to think that maybe she will end up at Chelsea, which, I can understand why people might be upset about that. But I do think Arsenal will go big for some defenders at some point anyway. But yeah, quite a lot going on. I guess my plea to Arsenal fans would be not to fall too much for the neighbour's garden syndrome. Don't get angry on the basis of other people's transfers. Like there's no point. It's a complete waste of energy, and the transfer window is about your team, what you think your team needs, and there's room for you to get annoyed about that, and etc. But let's get to this game anyway. So Arsenal play Crystal Palace. It has to be said, if you're coming back from a winter break, this is probably the fixture you'd choose, particularly with the FA Cup game being called off. And Jamie Renee Slegers said in her programme notes about how she'd arranged some 11v11 kind of games at Colney, that they'd got an external referee. She said having a referee was important for the competitiveness, but also because it's an external factor that the players don't control, and they needed to reintroduce that. I mean, I was slightly surprised they didn't go away for some kind of training camp like they did last year, but I guess, did you have any concerns coming into this one off the back of, not really playing any friendlies?
No, actually, I didn't have any concerns. Like you said, Tim, it's probably the best case scenario playing Crystal Palace and also playing them at home in Meadow Park. I think my biggest concern was the momentum that Arsenal gathered before the Christmas break. It felt as if nothing was going to stop that momentum, purely because the results that they felt like they were gathering was just like this interim head coach has come in charge. The players are really like driven by their own motivation. And it felt as if that winter break maybe would have hindered that. So that's what I was most nervous about, because it did feel kind of like a fairy tale before Christmas. So coming into this Crystal Palace game, a bit of time away, the players don't really have that up and running sense of, oh, what are we going to do next? So that's what I was nervous about. And obviously I was proved wrong in that second half, which was brilliant. I was glad to see it, but less so nervous about the competitive fixtures. I think a lot of teams, most clubs didn't have any. So yeah, I wasn't nervous about that, but I was a bit worried about the momentum kind of stalling off the back of Christmas.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And Arsenal did it last year, and let's face it, it didn't massively help, did it? So I did wonder. I had it down on my docket to ask, actually, at the press conference, whether Arsenal had considered going for like a winter training camp or anything like that. And I just didn't get to it because there's a lot of people in the room on Friday because of the unveiling and all of that. But yeah, I think this would, like, if we'd been playing Chelsea away off the back of this, then I think I would have probably been a bit more worried. But one of the things that really helps in games like this is an early goal. And some of us spoke to Leah Williamson on Friday, and she talked a bit about, well, I have to find ways to connect with the crowd sometimes, being an Arsenal fan. And she said, I'm not going to score a goal, am I, and do it that way. But Katie McCabe with a low corner in. Third consecutive game where Arsenal have scored from a corner now. And lovely start for Arsenal and for Leah.
Yeah, very much so. Nice to see her at the back post tapping that in. And I think the best part of that was the animated celebration we got from her. I think Leah, she's quite a reserved footballer in that respect. So it was nice to see, the tongue out and kind of running around, and, good for her. I thought it was interesting that it was off a set piece though, Tim. I was speaking to someone at Arsenal a couple of weeks ago. I think it was actually before the winter break. And they said, although, there's been a tough kind of run with set pieces and how Arsenal have defended and attacked set pieces, a lot of that comes from the fact that when there's a condensed schedule at the start of the season, and when there's a lot of back-to-back games, and when players are coming back and we're kind of managing individual loads, the first thing to go at the end of a training session is set pieces. So the set piece coach doesn't get their time with the squad to kind of set up the routine, go through what they want to go through in terms of, how we combat each opposition. That's the first thing to get cut off in player management. So I think now that the team have come back and they've got more time together, or even, at the back half of 2024, when there's less fixtures, or maybe not so less fixtures, there's probably more fixtures, but less individual player loading coming back from the summer, I think the set piece coach has finally been able to get in there and organize some things, and that's what we've been seeing. And it's been nice to see, because it feels like there's actually a bit of structure to these set pieces. No more short corners hitting the first man and none of that nonsense. So yeah, no, I think that goal was great because it was great for Leah, but I think it was great because it showed that there's more coming from that area.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, there was a change in set piece coach in the summer. Patrick Vinquist was doing them last year, and I mean, I think he might have been Arsenal's first ever kind of full-time set piece coach. Like, this is all very nascent in the women's game. I think before, Leanne Hall had, as a former goalkeeper and goalkeeper coach, had kind of looked after that area, but not quite in a really full-time capacity. And they brought Chris Bradley in, who's got a lot of experience with this. And yeah, it probably didn't look like there was a lot of change straight away, and I happen to think a lot of it is just to do with Arsenal not having they're not a very tall team, Arsenal, really. So I think a lot of it's to do with that. But I think what's quite interesting is this set piece goal is very similar to the one Russo scores at Liverpool, and it's the same delivery from Katie McCabe. It's not quite along the floor, but it's low. And I think, the way she hits it, it's almost like when you hit a shot at a goalkeeper and you try to make it bounce just before it gets to them to get them to spill it. It's kind of that low, almost bobbly delivery, which is probably quite difficult for defences to deal with. But it's probably a bit of a leveller in the fact that Arsenal don't have lots and lots of tall players attacking those set pieces unless, until such time you put Lena Hertig on, and then, you start putting them up in the sky a little bit. But I think we have seen a bit of a change in the set pieces there, and a little bit more innovative. And Katie McCabe has been the one taking them, actually, the last three. The one Russo scores against Bayern Munich, that's from Katie McCabe as well. And at that point, I don't know about you, Jamie, I was quite relaxed at that point. I thought, nice early goal. Frankly, I was expecting maybe a 5-0 win or something in that region, but it kind of, there were some nice sections of play, but Renee said afterwards she didn't feel Arsenal themselves in the first half. Do you? And she said she felt that was natural just because of the kind of the month off. But did you feel it kind of hit a bit of a lull after that?
Yeah, I think everyone did. I think, it felt that way even in the stadium. The fans were a little bit more quiet. It just felt like things weren't sticking. I think that, Arsenal in it, like they dominated the possession, but I think Crystal Palace in terms of the central third did well to navigate that. And I think they knew when to sit off and they knew when to jockey and kind of give the defenders more time on the ball and really mark their midfielders. So I think it just took the wind out of Arsenal a little bit. I also think I liked the first 5 minutes because there was one little piece of play where I think it was Emily Fox, Frida Morn and Beth Mead, and they kind of combined. It was this nice little tiki-taka move. And that's what it seemed like they were trying to do a lot of, like distribution and working the ball that way. And it just felt like Crystal Palace was sitting quite well to negate that. So, yeah, it did feel a little bit more of a quiet, no, this isn't great. And I think this would have been 6 months ago and maybe Palace had a little bit more of a goal-scoring threat, perhaps someone like Elise Hughes fit, I would have been a bit nervous knowing how that team kind of played in that Jonas Eidevall against those not low blocks, but, mid dropping deep kind of blocks. So, yeah, I was nervous because of past trauma, but it was all okay in the end.
Yeah, Renee said afterwards when I asked her that they were slightly surprised in that they expected Palace to be more of a 5-3-2, but actually they were a 5-4-1. And to your point, initially in the game, they actually start with quite a high defensive line, and Arsenal go over the top of it a few times. And I think Palace kind of abandoned that. After like 15, 20 minutes, they can, like, why you'd play a high line when Arsenal have got Leah Williamson at centre-back, and particularly because they were putting no pressure on Steph Catley or Leah Williamson, that just seemed a bit of a recipe for disaster. And there's a point where Russo goes through on goal, and I'd really like to say, unfortunately, because this game wasn't taken by one of the big broadcasters, there weren't multiple angles, because I wasn't sure about that Russo offside at all, where she goes through one-on-one. But I think Palace worked out not to do that. I think the other thing that really struck me, Jamie, is, and we wrote the analysis piece about this earlier today, like everything was down the right. Everything was down the right. Like, I reckon a good 60 to 70% of Arsenal's attacks all went down the right. And I think they were kind of targeting Christine Weyer, who used to play for Arsenal, actually started her career as a winger. Then she became a fullback. She's kind of moved to centre-back the last couple of years. And I think you can see she doesn't have those natural defensive instincts. And I think Arsenal were really trying to get her to jump out. And I think that's a big part of the reason that Beth Mead started ahead of Caitlin Ford, because Arsenal felt this was a short combination game, not a dribbling game on that side. I mean, it was down our side, the press box side in the first half. Did that strike you at all? How much of the play was right next to us?
It's very true. It was very, very... Anyone that knows where the press box is at Meadow Park, it's bang in the middle on the halfway line, on the opposite side, so the west stand. And it was very, very repetitively down that side. And I think that's why you kind of pick out players' faults and when they're not playing as well. I was paying a lot of attention to Beth Mead because I thought she was a little bit wasteful on the ball, because we were trying to play that short pass game, because the ball was heavily down the right side. And I think you felt that a lot when Mariona kind of forced herself inside as well. She began to float across, and sometimes I think that made it a little bit too sticky in the middle. I think Frida Mornham got a bit unlucky sometimes because it felt like she was getting herself into the right positions, but it was crowded and the players were crowding the area. Although it may have been a tactical decision to go down the right side, it felt like not everyone was kind of clued into that. And Meadow Park is a little bit of a smaller ground to the Emirates, so that's natural that's going to happen. But yeah, no, Tim, I completely agree.
Yeah, and I've seen Beth kind of caught a little bit of heat for her performance, and I know I appreciate like the actual data like doesn't look great in terms of like duels and dribbles and stuff like that, but I have a slightly different take on it. I think this wasn't a game that was about accuracy in terms of completing passes. Like, I think it was about causing a bit of chaos on that side. I think it was about getting Katrina Vea and Blanchard to jump out of their positions. And I think that's why Beth plays, because you play Caitlin on the right and she's a great dribbler, but I don't think they wanted someone to take the left back and the left centre back on. I think they were trying to get them out of position. And I think that's why Beth played. I think that's why she stays on as well. So the beginning of the second half, it's Frida that comes off. Beth stays on. Mariona kind of goes towards the right. I think there's a reason Beth stayed on, and she scores the goal as well. I think this was a game that was a little bit more about causing that little bit of chaos, and I actually think she was a really key part of the victory on the day, even if the kind of FB ref columns don't pop out. But it's 1-0 at half time, and the first half, it kind of drifts to a bit of a conclusion, and I think I was expecting another high-octane start to the second half, but I think Palace really got clued in to what Arsenal were doing on the right. They really put numbers over there. They really got aggressive over there. And to be honest, the first 10 minutes of the second half kind of looked like the last 15 minutes of the first, right?
Yeah, 100%. I've watched Crystal Palace. I've been at the games where they've played all the top sides, so to speak, this season. And it does feel like, although yesterday I don't feel this is the case, but it felt like against Manchester City and against Chelsea, despite the scorelines being very heavy, they did deserve more from those fixtures. And I think I know this isn't a Crystal Palace podcast, but I think that's a big testament to Laura Kaminsky's ability to game manage, because she's able to adapt to these bigger sides and how they kind of want to work around her team. But then her players get to about the 60th minute every time and they lose it. Chelsea, they dominated Chelsea. I thought they were very, very good at hit the 45, and then it's just an inexperienced team that lose their heads. It ends up 7-0 against Chelsea. It's the same case against Arsenal, because, Tim, I agree. I think they came out after half-time much more clued in. I think Kaminsky had clued in on what Arsenal were trying to do down that right side and set her team up very well. And whether it's inexperience, whether it's youth, whether it's just, they don't have the quality of players, they're unable to sustain that, because I don't think their issue is tactics. I think their issue is mentality, and it's being able to run out games. And that is why Renee did such a good job operating those subs when she did, because it did feel like Kaminsky had clued in, Palace had clued in. So I think Renee, to see those opening 10 minutes and make those decisions to make those substitutions and combat that again, it was impressive. And I think that's what won the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about Renee Slegers being willing to make early changes in the game. And I must admit, initially, I was like, yeah, I think she does, but I'm not sure how much of a departure that is from Jonas Eidevall. I feel like, when a manager's in a honeymoon period, everyone talks everything up. And when people don't like another manager, people go fishing for problems. And, everything was absolutely universally bad and every single thing that happened was terrible kind of thing. But I think it's being borne out that Renee does make those early changes. It's 56 minutes. It's Frida Mornham off, Caitlin Ford on, switches a few things around. I think a lot of that was about getting Mariona, because on the face of it, you think, okay, Mariana's going to move to the centre now, and she kind of does, but really she drifts to the right because it's getting really congested over there, and in congested spaces, that's the player you want. And then she makes another little change because Caitlin is a player who's going to stay wide and give you that width. And actually, Katie McCabe comes into midfield. If you kind of stop the footage, and actually you look at the second goal, Katie drives through the centre of the pitch before releasing the ball to Caitlin. So, not a massive change in the game plan or the system that much, but she just swaps a few pieces around. And, within a couple of minutes, Caitlin has a shot, Russo puts it in, and then on the right side, Mariona frees things up with a quick first-time ball to Russo. Lovely pullback for Beth Mead. And within 5-6 minutes of that substitution, Arsenal are 3-0 up, and it does feel, doesn't it, like, the manager is really kind of, it feels to me like she gives a second half 10 minutes and says, okay, can we problem solve? And if they can't, she just steps in.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. I think the fans really like it as well, because there was a lot of times where we saw complacency, and I think Jonas just waited that little bit too long and hoped that something happened. And we saw that like yesterday. I think the substitutions again, like you said, Tim, they were made at the perfect time. I was watching the game after work today, and it did interest me when Caitlin Ford comes on. Mariona obviously moves more centrally. Katie McCabe becomes a completely attacking player. I noticed that as well. And I think that's also the note of, okay, this back four isn't needed right now. They're not necessary. When they're playing Katie Stengel as a lone number 9, it's not really necessary. I think there were only a couple times where Palace looked threatening, and I'm going to mess this name up. I think it's Mille Guy, number 22. I think it's Guy. But she was probably the only one that looked threatening on the counter attack. When she came off, I think Renee also analysed that and said, "Hey, we don't need this back four anymore." Kind of sent Katie McCabe up, and we know how good she is at Carnage Ball, because I think her and Ford overload that side and really, really confuse teams. Josie Green, Hayley Nolan, they had no idea what they were doing. So yeah, it's smart managerial movements, and I really, really like to see it, because I feel like we haven't seen those little changes for a while in Arsenal, because they have the players, and yeah, it was really, really effective.
Yeah, and I think maybe they waited before going to that, because it does become a back three. Like, Katie is playing in midfield basically for the last half an hour, and I wonder if she waited because they were thinking, okay, they've been 5-4-1, maybe they're going to go 5-3-2 soon, like we've been expecting them to, and they kind of don't, because Palace, their main goal kind of becomes to try and clog up that right-hand side for Arsenal. So they're still quite defensive in their mindset. So, and listen, you asked your question to Renee afterwards was about Mariona and about her adaptability and about her versatility. And, I think there were a lot of good performances on the day, but to me, I think she's one of the ones that really stood out.
I thought she was fantastic. I think a lot of people were calling her first half display not that impressive. I thought what she did yesterday in the first half was, because the ball wasn't on the left side as much as she would have hoped, she was dropping back, she was helping Katie McCabe. I think as soon as Mariana loses the ball, within 3 seconds she wins it back. I think her defensive game in the first 45 minutes was so impressive, and that's what I noticed the most yesterday. And then she just turns into a different player. And there's so little amount of world-class footballers out there right now that can do that. It feels as if she can play 3 different games of football within 90 minutes. And I asked Renee Slegers about that and about her versatility. And I can read what she said back. She said she's such a great player, so intelligent in finding the spaces. She communicates very well and is very intense. She does lose the ball sometimes because she's risk-taking, which we want, because she has the intent, but she's so good in the counter pressure as well, and she always wins the ball back immediately. I think that's exactly it, though. I think it's just this kind of like risk-taking footballer that Arsenal have been a little bit conservative over recent seasons. I thought she was phenomenal yesterday, and I think that the main reason for that is how versatile she is. She's able to kind of switch straight away without real game plans being changed, and yeah, I can't believe a player like that is in an Arsenal shirt.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Because when we think, I think understandably, when we think of Barcelona players, we will think a lot about the kind of the passing, the movement, and all the stuff we definitely see from Mariona. We can see that she's a Barcelona player, absolutely. But, in terms of that intensity off the ball is phenomenal. And I'm just reading the stats here in terms of tackles won. I mean, her average is 4.44 tackles won per 90 minutes, and that's the highest in the squad of anyone that's played at least 90 minutes. So, Katie Reid has got 10 tackles won per 90 minutes, but that's spread over 9 minutes. So kind of discount that. And, ditto Laura Wienreuter's got 5, but that's over about 20 minutes. So, yeah, Mariana, 4.44. That's more than Leah Volti, more than Katie McCabe, more than everyone. Winning over 4 tackles a game as a creative midfielder, it really shows you. And I think it was just like a very, very nice move where Renee, particularly on her side where the dugout is, could see that Palace were committing more numbers over there. And she could have tried to avoid that area. She could have said, okay, let's try and play somewhere else. But she thought, no, we can still get them here. I just need to put the player who's more comfortable in tight spaces over there. And that's the thing we underestimate when we talk about versatility. And it's the same with Katie McCabe. She can just go and play in midfield, and it's the same with Steph Catley, who can play as like, a wide centre back in a back three as she does. Effectively that's three kind of defensive positions she handles depending on the game state, and Arsenal just being able to slide in and out of these different phases, I think, is really, really interesting. And I mean, you were at the open training on Friday morning as well. I think we should kind of comment on this. Like, been to a lot of the open training sessions and everything. And again, I'm not saying everything before was bad and now everything was great. It's just different. And players sometimes just need that change of impetus. But even the setup at the training ground, the rondos, the way training was organised, it looked different, didn't it? Like it was organised differently. You could see that.
100%. It felt like it was organised differently. Something I haven't seen before at an open session was these like striking and attacking midfield group. They were off doing shooting practice and everyone else was doing rondos. And I think that alone is, in isolation is a testament to how, this squad is being managed separately, but it doesn't feel like there's any kind of separation. Which I think is really impressive. But the rondos were so good to watch. The players and the staff are, getting along and having laughs. And, Lusa has to do push-ups. Renee Slegers is in there, bringing it to Katie McCabe. I thought it just felt like the vibe at the Arsenal camp was so high. And it felt like it was not less regimented, because obviously she's a very, very professional manager, but it felt like it was allowing the players to have fun before we got cracking. And of course, you're always going to, you're not doing your technical drills in front of the media. That's why we only get 15 minutes. It's so we can't have the game plan. But yeah, no, it was nice to see that little just fun part of training rather than your average, running up and down and doing your warm-ups, which I'm sure they did. But yeah, no, it was nice to see.
Yeah, and they were cracking like the size 1 footballs out and things like that. And again, in 18 months or 2 years, we could be saying the players are probably bored of that and need something else now. Like, you do need to like change the stimulus for a group every now and then. But one of the things that Renee told me as well was that, they kind of divided the team in terms of coaching. So she was saying like her focus is more attack, and Aaron Dantino really focuses on the out of possession kind of elements, the defence of unit. And, Arsenal have conceded 1 goal in 7 WSL games now, and that was off a set piece away at United. And, that game, I don't think I'll ever get over that in terms of like how Arsenal didn't win that game. So, going into some big games, and it has to be said, against better opponents than Arsenal have really been playing, other than Bayern, who did score twice against Arsenal, looking in very good shape out of possession. But, another goal for Russo. Mariona moves to that right-hand side. She scores a penalty, the most ice-cold penalty you'll ever see, and then scores again off that right-hand side. But Russo with another goal, 7 goals in her last 6 WSL games. And again, Renee was asked about Russo afterwards, and she was, she kind of said it wasn't her best performance, but she kind of said she got a goal and an assist and it wasn't her best performance, which probably tells you a lot about the level at which she's playing at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I think that was an interesting comment. I like that a lot, because it was saying like, we didn't think she played very well. And I think her full quote ended up being, if we can say that she still scored and didn't play her best, that's just Alessia, because she's always looking to reach new levels. And she called her a young striker as well, which she is. She's not near her prime yet. So I think for Alessia Russo to be scoring right now, I know it was a tap-in. I understand that it was a tap-in, but it was an instinctive follow-up from a number 9, and we didn't see her doing that as much as we would have hoped a couple months ago. So for her just finding the back of the net, rolling in the form, for a player that didn't score in the opening 5 WSL games of the season, she is now 2 goals behind the Golden Boot. And obviously it is Bunny Shaw in first with 9 goals. However, she's sidelined right now. So if Russo can get cracking over the next couple of weeks, like, she's in hot form. And it's nice to see, because this is the player I think we're so excited to sign.
Definitely, yeah. And I love this goal as well, because it's a proper poacher's goal following in a rebound, which probably shouldn't have been a rebound. I think the goalkeeper, is it Sayers? She should be tipping that round the post, not back out, but Russo gambles on it and puts it in. And that, again, I kind of think a year ago, she probably wouldn't have been in the penalty area, let alone the 6-yard box. And I wrote in my preview, I put Russo as the player to watch, and I really remember something Jonas Eidevall said early in his reign when Beth Mead was kind of on fire, to coin a phrase. And in the press conference, he was asked in about 3 consecutive press conferences about Beth Mead's form. And I remember him saying that the challenge now for Beth is that nobody talks about form anymore. He said, like, the challenge is for her is that nobody comes to press conferences and says Beth's in good form, because it's just normal and everyone just consider, like, no one ever says Bunny Shaw's in good form in front of goal. Like, you just expect her to score in pretty much every game. And I think that's where I see things for Russo now, where she was full of confidence at the end of last season. Her confidence dipped. Her confidence is back up again now. I kind of want to see no more talk of confidence, no more talk of form, just for, 1-0 Arsenal, Russo to just be absolutely standard. Because I think she's got it in her. I really, really do. I think she does so many other good things as well, other than scoring goals. And I'm incredibly happy that she's in the team. But I guess let's talk about, something at the end of the game, I guess. Like, saw the substitutions, Rose Kafaji comes on and gets some minutes, and I think Caitlin makes a real impact as well when she comes on, and I think she doesn't start this game because of the game plan on the right, but I still think I still expect her to start at Chelsea, put it that way. But interesting sub at the end where Emily Fox comes off, which I think we all expected and welcomed, and Emily Fox was given extra time off over Christmas as well. But again, it's Katie Reid that comes on and not Laura Wienreuter. And Katie Reid, of course, started at right back in Oslo against Vålerenga. And before Christmas, I was very much thinking, well, okay, Laura's had, another knee injury. They're probably taking it slowly. But I have to say I was expecting after the winter break for that maybe not to be as big a problem. I did ask Renee about it, and she said there's no problem with her fitness. What did you make of that change? Do you think there's anything in that or not?
Yeah, look, when it first happened, when it first occurred, my first thought was it might just be kind of managing a load. She might not have returned from the Christmas break very well. Obviously, she's had back-to-back complications off the back of her ACL injury. But then you obviously asked Renee Slegers about it in the press conference, and she kind of fluffed a little bit about the game plan and why bringing Katie Reid on was a good idea, and said that Laura had no fitness issues. So that's interesting. It is very interesting. Obviously, it's a hard gig right now for Laura Wienreuter, because I think Emily Fox is the most in-form right back in Europe. Maybe you want to stretch that to the world. Like, I think it's a very hard gig to be able to get into Emily Fox right now. Obviously, Laura can't really play on the left side, so you can't really give her a go there. So, yeah, I think, look, it's a hard shoe-in, but when you are picking an 18-year-old preferred centre-back at right back, it is a bit interesting. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's something to keep an eye on. I really do. I do think it's something to keep an eye on. It looks a bit ominous to me, I must say. I don't take any pleasure in saying that, because I think particularly before her injury, I thought Laura was a player when we bought her I really doubted. The first couple of performances, I really wasn't convinced at all. But then, because she came in a January window, but then at the beginning of her first full season, I thought, okay, I get this now. I thought she was playing really, really well, and the battle with Noelle Maritz was a really, really good one. I mean, I'm with you. Unfortunately, I think even like a fully fit Laura Wienreuter, like Emily Fox, is in the conversation for best right back in the world. So, like, I kind of think that is what it is. But yeah, I found it a bit interesting, and I'm with you. Like, Renee's answer didn't hugely convince me, I must say. But yeah, one to keep an eye on. I think we've got some questions about the fullbacks, not just right back, but left back as well in the second half. But before we break for the second half and come back with some questions, who's your player of the match, or not even just your player of the match, but maybe a player we haven't spoken about that you wanted to give some flowers to, or not, or maybe you thought someone was rubbish or had an interesting performance?
Am I going to go on like a 5-minute slander session?
You can if you want.
I have no one to slander. I'm going to say it's a bit generic, but I want to give it to Leah Williamson, and not just because, she's scoring a tap in. And I just think watching that game back this evening, I saw it a little bit in person when I was watching it live, but watching that game back, I really think Leah was having fun, and I think she was playing with so much freedom. And although she obviously came back from her ACL injury, put in some good performances, she's had complications, and we've seen that. And it always felt as if she was a little bit caught up in her own brain when she's playing football, whether she's kind of running, not in full-fledged, whether she's like just looking a little bit unhappy in a situation. It felt like against Crystal Palace on Sunday, she was like even just like running backwards and just like stuff that she's not thinking about, any injury that she's had in the last 2 years. She's playing with freedom. She was carefree. It looked like she was having fun. Like I said earlier, that celebration is not something we usually see from Leah Williamson. So yeah, I was stoked for her because it felt like she's gotten her enjoyment back in football. And we spoke about that, Tim, and she said a lot of that is down to the freedom that Renee Slegers has given to her. And she said she's helped her mentally, and she's helped her kind of get back into that strong mentality of trusting herself. So I thought we saw that transpire. So I'm going to give it to Leah. I was really happy for her.
Yeah, I thought she was great, particularly at the beginning of the game when Palace play that high line and she just plops the ball over the top of them a few times and they go, okay, let's not do this anymore. For me, I referenced her a little bit purely tactically, but Katie McCabe, I think, again, for me, has started all 21 of Arsenal's games so far this season, the only player to do that. She's got 25 starts in a row, and just the effortlessness with which she just switches roles, like within a game, just like that, like playing as an overlapping left back. Okay, now we need you to invert into midfield. No problem. Do that. And no one even notices. Like, I bet very few people in that stadium are like, oh, Katie's in midfield now. Like, it's just so seamless. I think it's incredibly underrated quality she has to just switch between positions, between different roles, perceptibly, imperceptibly. I think she's a great footballer, and there is a reason that she starts every single game, and that's a big part of it. So, that's it for part one. We will go to a break now and we'll come back in part two with your questions right after this. Okay, you're back with me and Jamie Spanger, looking back at Arsenal's 5-0 win over Crystal Palace on Sunday. We're going to go to reader questions, all of which have been, listener questions, all of which have been taken on Blue Sky. Very, very few of them about the game itself, which I think is entirely natural because, frankly, with all due respect, Arsenal should be beating Crystal Palace 5-0 at home, and I don't think people were hugely surprised. But I'm going to go with a question for you, Jamie. And I spoke a little bit about the kind of right-back situation in part one, but this is a kind of an extension on that theme. And this is from at Max Radwan. Are you concerned about overburdening our fullbacks? Katie and Fox have started every league game this season, and we've limited cover for either, given that Steph is filling in at centre-back, while on the right, Wienreuter hasn't been able to build up her fitness. Any concerns there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think there are concerns because if you get to the back end of the season and let's say Emily Fox picks up an injury, God, my gosh, touch wood. Everyone listening to this podcast, touch wood. Let's say that were to happen. You don't really want to be going into, the back end of Champions League, the back end of the WSL. You've obviously got the cups with limited players. All respect to Katie Reid. She is going to be a phenomenal player, but, she's not someone you really want starting in these big game occasions. So I'm a little bit worried about that. Same as Katie McCabe. I think she's very, very irreplaceable because let's say we have to move Steph Catley into left back. That means you have to, bring in Laia Katina, a lot of Moy, and that's not a bad thing. They're both good footballers, but I think it's finally beginning to really click between Steph and Leah, and you don't really want to disrupt that right now. So, yeah, I'm a bit concerned with how many players are on the ground if they are to pick up an injury. If I can be assured that that will not happen, I'm happy with who's there now because I think Laura Wienreuter, like we said, is a very good footballer. Katie Reid is very able as well. There are solutions, but I wouldn't like to see it considering Arsenal are competing in so many cup competitions and maybe we'll discuss the league a little bit more as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm less worried about left back just because I think there are ways round that. Like Arsenal do have two left backs and they've got some centre backs they can bring in. Right back, I'm a little bit more worried about, and I think we'll see what happens there. Have you got a question for me?
I do. This one is from Bunny, not Bunny Shaw, unfortunately. Ask us listener Bunny Shaw.
Take the rest of the season off, Bunny. That's what I said.
Bunny, stop it. Stop trying, mate. At Tocky Bun Buns, how would you describe Slegersball so far? Do you think it's too early to understand her style of football, given that she just got the permanent position, or are there significant signs that have already differentiated her era from Eidevall? Tim, we've spoken a lot about the small changes, but do you think, I think I'll rephrase this one a little bit, do you think there are going to be big tactical shifts with Renee, and do you think maybe she does have a fundamentally different managerial style?
I don't think she has a fundamentally different style, but we are seeing some different ideas. We spoke about the willingness to change things a little bit earlier and kind of go to plan B. Clearly, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you've got like her as an assistant coach, and she must have had these ideas the whole time. Do you know what I mean? But it's really interesting. It must be really interesting. I'm not saying it like critically that she was sitting there thinking, "Oh, this is rubbish. I'd do everything differently." But it's really interesting, isn't it, when someone who's been on the staff for so long does then just change those little things, like change the impetus in training, change the setup of training and the rondos and all of that. And Leah said something in the interview in the kind of round table that we did on Friday where she talked about, we've had a little bit of time to work on some other stuff, you know, that she's wanted to bring in. So I think fundamentally a lot of the principles are the same. I'm not seeing like I'm not seeing like, for example, when Arsenal went from Montemuro ball to Ida ball, as it were, I could see it straight away. I was like, wow, this is much more direct, more pressing, more crosses, you know, and like Joe's football was very, very distinct as well. I'm not seeing that, but it's more little pieces around the edge. And what I think is going to be really interesting, particularly around like the next couple of transfer windows, like who are the players she doesn't see? You know, like there's going to be some change. That's just completely natural. Like every single transfer window, players leave and players come in. But it's going to be really interesting to see like who's she not having, who's she having, you know, who's going to move on, whether some of those decisions have been made and how that evolves her style of football. So I don't think the style is different. Like it's this, I'd say it's probably like the same genre of Jonas Eidevall football, but like, yeah, maybe some different subgenres and subplots going on. And what's really interesting is she's talking so much about allowing the players to have that input as well into what they think should be happening. And yeah, I think it's really interesting, her approach at the moment. And I think it's really working at the moment. That there will be a day when it doesn't. That is just completely natural. It happens to every single manager. The question is that in 10 years? Is that in 8 years? Is that in 1 year? Like every manager outstays their welcome eventually. But yeah, I think it's more the energy. I think it's more the kind of, I get more of the impression that some of those players on the bench maybe still feel quite connected to the team. Maybe not all of them. Like it's harder for defenders because defenders don't tend to come on. But yeah, I am feeling a bit more kind of connection. I think it's a bit more intangible at the moment. But yeah, there we go. How about this one from... Yeah, okay. This is more or less asking you the same question, but I think it's interesting we've had it twice. But this is from at Ironline, and she asks, the back-to-front sequence goal, so the third goal that Beth Mead scores, was really refreshing and hopefully a sign of more to come for going for that when it's on, rather than the slow, more controlled build-up we've been used to seeing. A lot more fluid front line instead of set zones that they stay in. Is this opponent dependent, or do you think this is a fundamental part of Renee's football? So I guess, are you sensing more fluidity and improvisation?
Yeah, I had this question as well, and I think it's both. I do think it's both. I think it is opponent dependent. I think that Crystal Palace, by that stage of the game, they weren't set up how they wanted to. The organisation was like next to nothing. And I think we'd seen those changes kind of creep in, and that goal is set up by Mariona Caldente's one-touch ball around the corner. Like, to be able to hit that is just superb. And I think it is opponent dependent, because I do think Crystal Palace were very loose. And when you're able to break down those kind of teams that play that, they're unsure of where their block lies, it's easy to play that kind of end-to-end football, high transition football. However, I do think we've spoken about this a lot, Tim. It's players thinking less. And that it might sound a bit silly, but like, the players are not overthinking. They're not like taking 3 or 4 touches and looking for that perfect pass. They're thinking less. And we saw that in that build-up. It starts with Leah Williamson. All the high transition goals that Arsenal have scored in the last couple of months, they start with Leah Williamson at the back, because she's so good at opening up the play. And I just think every player that touched the ball in that scenario is just full of confidence right now. So I think it's fundamental in the way that maybe the way that Renee is setting up the team, they're given the freedom, and that kind of ties into what Leah said. They're given the freedom to either give feedback, they're given the freedom to kind of express themselves, and it feels like Renee's not going to get angry if they try something like that. But I think that it just gave the signs of players that were brimming with confidence, and Russo is really good to find Beth Mead, and Beth Mead's not particularly high on confidence right now, but I think when you feel that energy, it goes into the back of the net. And I want to add on that one as well. When she scored that goal, it really felt like the players and the team got around her. They got around everyone on the day, but I thought it was really, really nice. I think Caitlin Ford especially really got around Beth, and that's what it's all about right now. Because I think there was some times where, again, I'm waffling here, but it was that Chelsea game when Caitlin Ford scored, and no Arsenal player really reacted to it. And it didn't feel like the game was over yet. And it was like, why are these players not getting around each other? Yesterday, it felt like they were getting around each other. And yeah, so to answer Iron Lion's question, I think it's opponent dependent. I don't think that's going to happen against a team like City or Chelsea, the way they set up, even United. But I do think there's something different going on with these players right now. And it's permitting them to play that free-flowing football.
Yeah, definitely. And we should say that Jonas's approach against those Chelsea, City, that more controlled players staying more in zones, that's quite successful against those teams generally. But it's like more like this type of game. And I'd like to add on to that as well. So I'll ask you another question after this. But yeah, I think you've got at what I'm getting at as well, that I don't actually think it's hugely tactical. I do think it's more psychological. Because at the end of last season, the beginning of this season, I know Jonas Eidevall was trying to introduce greater fluidity, and he spoke a lot about Emily Fox being a game changer there because she can do different things. And there was kind of, Emily Fox and Beth Mead swapping positions, and there was fluidity in the forward line. I remember writing the analysis piece when Arsenal, equivalent fixture last season, Bristol City at home, Arsenal won 5-0 in April. And I remember writing about like the fluidity of the front line. And I think Jonas tried to go there, but I'm not. I do feel it's a bit more psychological. Like maybe it wasn't as natural to him. And to like give you a torturous analogy, I remember early in my career when I worked in a government department, and we had a director who was an amazing lawyer, but wasn't a great people person. And this was kind of coming through in feedback. And I remember once on a Friday afternoon, he just did a walk around the office, because it's like, okay, yeah, people, think maybe I'm just in my office a bit too much, and, a bit too much on the details and not on the people. And he did like a floor walk, and it was excruciating. It was absolutely excruciating. And I felt so sorry for him, because it's clear that like he'd rather have done anything else in the world. And it was so awkward because he just wasn't that like he was trying to do the right thing, but it just wasn't natural. And I think I did have that feeling at the end of last season. Jonas spoke about fluidity, and I was like, I see it. I see them trying it, but it still feels a bit stiff. Whereas now I think it does feel a little bit more, that like Renee's spoken a lot about enjoyment, right? She's like, when you're enjoying yourselves, you try things, and you're more likely to get more out of a person. And I think it's been more of a change of energy than a change of tactics per se, with a few little tweaks. But Why don't we? A question here. I've got actually. There's kind of one more which does relate to the game, and then of course there's games against Brighton on Wednesday night, and then a big one against Chelsea on Sunday. But this is from at NDMW. On a day where we struggled a bit in the first 55 minutes to pick the lock and find the right final action for the slick one-touch combination passing moves, it proved a real game changer to be able to bring forward on to offer a different approach of running straight through at a defender. So if we do look set for a quieter transfer window, do you think there's anyone else in the current squad with the development potential to provide some similar directness in the wide positions? So yeah, let's say we don't buy a winger, and I kind of don't think we will at the moment. Like, is there anyone else that you think can really give Arsenal something out wide?
Tim, I can already see you getting tweeted out on social media right now. Tim Stillman confirms no wide players. No, yeah, that's a really good point. I think that Caitlin Ford did bring a new level to the game, obviously for reasons we've discussed. She's just a different player to Beth Mead, isn't she? So, yeah, she brought the directness. I'm stumped on that. That's one I should probably have thought about more, because I think that right now, if we're talking about wide profile players themselves, there's not really anyone that could offer that. I think the what Arsenal do have and what Renee does have, and we have seen her use it, is playing Russo in a wide area and playing Stina up front. And I think maybe if that is an opportunity that they can use against the correct opposition, that is one. But that's just a different wide profile. I don't think Arsenal really have a direct ball at your feet, carry it into the box kind of player, except for maybe Rosa Kafaji. And I think that Rosa Kafaji right now, obviously, is probably going to develop into a 10, but she's not playing as a 10 as much for Arsenal right now. But she is probably the only other player other than Caitlin Ford that if you give her the ball at her feet, she'll break up the defence because she'll just charge at them. And we saw her kind of dive for a definitely not their penalty against Crystal Palace. So there's always scope for that. I think if Arsenal do need to look into, like, we don't have a direct winger, we don't have an out-and-out wide player, Rosa Kafaji is a good solution because she is very direct. She doesn't play the passing game. She plays the dribbling game. And I think that will bring a bit of a new dimension. We haven't seen it a lot, though. We haven't seen it a lot.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let me clarify on the transfer thing. I'm not aware of any link at the moment, but things can and do change with one message. But I think Lena Hurtig does bring that. It's just a case of, like, can she start a game? I don't know. What I like the club still being very, very careful with her. You know, she had an extended winter break as well. She wasn't in the squad on Sunday because I want to be careful with her because she's had a lot of muscular injuries. So I don't know whether she can start games. I think certainly off the bench she can bring that directness. But I'm with you. I think Rosa Kafaji is probably the closest to it. And actually, I think it'd be pretty valuable for her development anyway, because I kind of think the number 10 position is probably a little bit crowded at this particular moment in time, and that might change. You're only ever one or two injuries away from being down to the bare bones. Look at the men's team and left backs. They've got about 15 of them and they're all injured. So we had to bring an 18-year-old in. So, things can change like that quickly. But I'm with you. I think Rosa Kafaji is definitely much more of that profile. And I think because she has still, like, some rough edges in that kind of high risk, high reward approach, I kind of think most coaches would say if they're going to lose the ball, they'd rather lose it out wide than in a central position. So I'm with you. I definitely think Kafaji, and actually I think that would be quite a neat solution if Arsenal don't add a wide player during January. In fact, why don't I? We've got a question a little bit related to that I'll throw back to you, and I promise I won't comment on this one, from at Lena's penalty kick, presumably not an American listener. Realise it's not healthy to look backwards, but as a Chloe Lacasse fan, given her comments about leaving after feeling her freedom and creativity were being stifled, do you think she'd have more minutes if she'd still been here in the Renee era? Or given the return of Lena Hurtig, do you still think she might struggle for minutes? So let's say Chloe Lacasse had stayed, and unfortunately she's done her ACL as well, and none of that had happened. Do you think she'd have had a bigger role this season than last?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I don't think she would, to be honest. I think she'd still be more of a squad player. I do think that Chloe Lacasse is a good footballer, but Tim, we spoke about this months ago. It just felt like it was never really the right fit, and it was just a little too late for Arsenal. I don't think Chloe Lacasse is that kind of ball at your feet winger either. She's not really what Arsenal are missing. She's a very quick paced winger. So yeah, I don't think she would be getting a shoe in over Ford or Mariona or Beth Mead right now. And I think it's a bit of a cop-out to say maybe that was Jonas Eidevall's fault and that's why Chloe Lacasse departed. I don't think that's completely why. It might have been part of the reason. I think maybe the way he kind of operated her wasn't suited to her and getting the best out of her, but I don't think she really works in this Arsenal lineup right now. She's a great player, and I do like Chloe Lacasse, all respect to her. But yeah, if we could get her back, I wouldn't be jumping at the opportunity because I don't think it's a profile of a player that Arsenal are particularly looking for right now.
Yeah, I think it was, and not because she's a bad player. I think it was a bad buy, basically. Yeah. I think that's what happened. Have you got a question for me?
I do. These ones are looking forward to Chelsea a little bit, although we do have a game against Brighton. They are a bit to both. We've got one from Jenny and one from Prashant, and they both say a similar thing. Jenny said, do you think it's worth resting players for the cup game on Wednesday, considering we've got Chelsea next in the league? Or, oh no, I've just clicked off the question. Jenny, come back. Where have you gone? Or do you think we have a better chance of winning a cup and therefore should play our first 11 against Brighton? And Prashant said a similar thing. What do you think the starting lineups will look at in Wednesday compared to Sunday? Considering Sunday's game, do you expect any rotations on Wednesday? Tim?
A little bit, yeah. Like nothing wholesale, but I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if they do give. Because you've also got to consider Crawley. It's a pretty heavy pitch, particularly in January. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Katie finally was given a little bit of time on the bench. So you know, and then you could see like Steph Catley, a left back, maybe Kadina and Wilburn. More like in defence, there's definitely room for it. Also, I do wonder whether they're. And this is where I think it's going to be really interesting as well, because I think ideally maybe they'd like to not start Emily Fox. But then, like, who would play that position? Lotte Wubben-Moy has played there before if they don't want to start Laura Wienreuter. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that, actually. I wouldn't be surprised to see, like, Lotte at right back or something like that. And then after that, you know, maybe you can get, like, Leah Volti back in, maybe Leah for Kim, because that's not a problem. That's like, you know, that gives Kim a bit of a rest and you're bringing in someone of the same talent, essentially. You know, Stina missed the game on Sunday with illness. If she's back, I could see her starting over Russo. I think Caitlin will come back into the team. I'm not expecting anything wholesale. But yeah, I think maybe Caitlin, Lotte, maybe Laia Kadina, Leah Volti. I think Manu will start in goal. I think they'll give her the cups. Yeah, maybe 5 changes, which is actually quite a lot, but not like I'm not expecting to see like any of the academy players are all going to go on loan anyway, basically, so they don't want to cup tie them. I think Freya Godfrey, who I will forever confuse with Freya Gregory, who moved today actually to Newcastle. Like Freya Godfrey and I think Layla Harbert, I think they're going to go out in the next kind of couple of days. So, and it will also be interesting about Katie Reid, because I kind of think at the end of the window, once maybe things are a bit clearer with like Amanda Illerstedt, for example, they might want to loan Katie out. So I don't know whether they'll, you know, but then realistically, would she go on loan to a Conti Cup semi-finalist? Probably not. So, you know, because you've got that. That's what would have been really interesting about the Bristol City game had it gone ahead when it did, because I think you'd have seen some players not in the squad because, you know, they're preparing for loan deals and things like that.
Tim, why are you discounting Durham? Why are you discounting Durham?
Well, yeah.
Chelsea.
Well, yeah. Probably not very likely, but let's stay on that kind of theme. We've got let's really look ahead to Chelsea in terms of Arsenal going into that game, of course, 7 points behind Chelsea, so really they have to win to create any sort of title race. I think a draw will not be enough, a defeat, and it's definitely off the table. And this is from Charlie at Charlie Seymour 94. If we were to win on Sunday at Stamford Bridge, do you think that puts us back into title contention? Is there anyone out there other than us who could have a good go at beating Chelsea right now? I mean, I watched the Manchester derby. I know you did. I've not been impressed with either of those teams the whole season. I think I think both of them were very lucky to take a point apiece off Arsenal. I really think Arsenal deserve to win both those games, and I've always been confident of kind of, of considering we were quite far behind both of them at one point. I always felt we could reel them in. Chelsea, I think that's a much harder job, but let's say we win on Sunday, title back on?
Yeah, honestly, I think this might be hard because you got to bring into consideration the players that Manchester City have coming back. But I want to call it a two-horse race, and that is very loose because I think, to be fair, the Manchester derby, I thought City were woeful defensively. They were absolutely scattered, and I think obviously Chiara Keating had a bad game, but so did everyone on that pitch. I didn't think it was a good showing, and it made Manchester United look a lot better than they are because a lot of those goals were just from direct errors. I don't think United looked like they were playing the most exciting brand of football either. So right now, I do think if a team at their best is going to contest with Chelsea, it is Arsenal, and that might be me with rose-coloured glasses, but Chelsea haven't lost a game yet this season, and it's not like they've been going to opposition's fields and looking completely invincible. I think they've looked so beatable and so vulnerable, and they lost 3 games last season and still won the title, and it kind of, I don't know if I'm setting an unfair tone to say, oh, they lost 3 games last season, they're going to do that again, it's just a matter of when, but I truly believe that there have been so many moments this season where that team have looked vulnerable, and I know they've got players coming back, but I just think if Arsenal can go to Stamford Bridge this weekend and get a win, it makes it 4 points. And I think, yes, then there is the challenge of City, but I just do see Chelsea slipping up. We saw it against Leicester City before Christmas. They looked toothless. And I really do believe that is a gettable team. The issue with that is Arsenal need to be perfect for the rest of the season. And I'm a little bit worried about that. And I think every team's worried about that. You can't really expect or predict a team to go unbeaten because, it's not going to happen. But, I think a win at Stamford Bridge does not discount Arsenal from the title race. 4 points is gettable with this many games left. And I really do think that if they can go in and win, they can win. If they just get a point, it's probably not on at all. But I do think it's a two-horse race. I don't see City or United looking threatening. I might be eating my words in 2 weeks when we play City away. But yeah, that's my take at least.
I think if we leave the Man City, because, it's Chelsea away, Man City away, I think if at the end of those 2 games, if Arsenal are 4 points behind Chelsea, I'll say I'd bite your hand off for that, for a start. And after that, Arsenal's fixture list is okay after that because they'll have done Chelsea and City both times. They've done United away. I think they got United at home on the final game, actually. So after City away, there is, a bit of a run, because the fixture list mirrors, right? And a bit like the run we've had under Renee, where, it has been largely quite winnable games. And I could see us getting on a run. But that's a very tall order. It's a very tall order to go and win at Chelsea, and then a very tall order a week later to go to City and win or draw that or whatever makes it 4 points. I think that's a very tall order, and I'm not going to put any money on it. I'm definitely not saying it definitely can't or won't happen, but I think that has to happen for there to be any sort of title race. Otherwise, it's weird, Chelsea do usually win the league, but it does usually go to the final day. If Arsenal don't win on Sunday, I don't think there'll be any final day, and I think eyes will turn to more Champions League relegation and all of that. Let's do one more question each, and my final one to you is going to be a little bit more lighthearted. It's from Katina McStenius at Laguna Beach. Any thoughts on Renee sticking with the tracksuit and parka ensemble? given her it's about the players, not me, and nothing will change messaging, it certainly tracks, no pun intended, but I'd love to see her establish a more distinct sartorial identity. Read, red infused gilet, puffer jacket chic, perhaps. So were you expecting maybe Renee to have a more flamboyant fashion choice now that she's got the 18-month contract in the back pocket?
I love that you've asked that question, Tim. I really love it. I was expecting her to show up in that cream trench coat that we always used to see Jonas rock up to the Emirates with. No, I love
and
that.
Casey Stoney as well. Casey had some good coats.
It's that cream coat. Remember when Mark Skinner showed up in it as well? Oh, that was atrocious. I love that she rocks up in the Arsenal gear. I think it's class. She's kind of proving it doesn't matter. I do think maybe if we're going to play Champions League nights at the Emirates, she might be told, hey, you want to wear a suit or something. But who cares? As long as we're winning games, I kind of like it. I like the humble look. I'm not completely against it.
Yeah, I do suspect it's maybe slightly deliberate, like not really separating herself from her staff that much, their players. We see this all the time, right? But I filmed it a bit on Sunday where, the players, when they're doing their kind of more, shall we say, aerobic warm-up with the cones, like her, Chris Bradley, Kelly Smith, and Aaron like kicking a ball around a little bit, and she's in a kind of Adidas Predators. Like I think you can tell that she'd still like to play.
Yeah.
Because her career ended at 26. Like it's but yeah. I have found that a bit interesting. I have to say because at Rosengård, I guess Rosengård don't have as multifaceted and lucrative a merchandising operation as Arsenal, where I'm sure Arsenal are very happy that she's wearing Arsenal gear all the time and like modelling the club shop. But I do think that's interesting, and I don't think it makes an awful lot of difference. Don't get me wrong, but it probably is a bit of a choice. If you've got a final one for me.
I do. I like this one. I think it's kind of peering back behind the curtain a little bit. It's from Respect Horror at Blue Sky. As journalists, do you think there's a difference between Renee's answers in press conferences / interviews as a manager and as interim? And what do you think about her openness in general compared to Jonas and other old managers? This is obviously a bit hard because we haven't had a very long time with Renee as a permanent head coach, just the post-match and one pre-match. But do you think there's a difference yet, Tim?
Not enormously, maybe in communication style. I haven't spotted an awful lot of difference in the kind of answers and what's in them. I do think they're relatively similar characters. I think Jonas is a bit more fiery than Renee. Renee, I think, exudes a lot of calm. And again, I suppose this kind of mirrors the tactical discussion, right? Like, is it tactics or is it energy? And I'd probably say the same here. I'd say, like, a lot of the things she says are actually quite similar, but the energy is definitely different. And, I got to sit down with her for 15 minutes as well on Friday afternoon. There was some interesting stuff in there. Like, I was really asking her about, like, where does your competitiveness come from? That's what I'm really interested in that with footballers, because I didn't have it when I played. I wasn't a competitive person. So I'm always really interested with football, because I think that's what sets footballers apart. Because I've played with and against lots of really talented players, but they just didn't have the kind of fire in the belly. And then I played with some guys I thought, quite good, and then they've gone on to like make careers out of it because they've got, like, it makes such a difference. And I asked her about it, and she was like, yeah, no, I'm competitive, but I can compartmentalize defeats and stuff like that. I didn't used to throw stuff around. But I also thought another really interesting insight, she spoke about Rosengård, and she spoke about the pressure there, because obviously Rosengård are expected to win the league. But actually she was talking about it was a different type of pressure because she was so close to everyone. And she was talking about how, like, the board of directors, the sporting director, like, it's a small staff and you all know each other. And the phrase she used was, when we lost, the world was black for those people, because it was like their lives, kind of thing. I think that's a really interesting angle on how she handles pressure. But I don't know about it. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there has been a huge difference. I feel like it is hard to judge though, because since she took the interim post, she has been asked for months and months consecutively 15 versions of the same question of "Do you want the job?" And albeit to
Which Arsenal picked up on very well in the announcement, by the way.
how good was that? Like, I have all respect to these journalists because they are being told by their editors that they need to ask these questions. So I understand why it's being asked, but I feel like we haven't really seen her like get into the tactical side of it now. And I did see a like funny tweet. I don't know if you've seen that meme, Tim, where it's like the people standing in a line and someone's like poking their head out and it's like making sure I don't fit in. It was like Tim Stillman at press conferences asking tactical questions, which we all love. Yeah, so I feel like we haven't seen the light of day yet because she's been kind of repetitively asked the same thing. I did think it was interesting though that she was going to go on to study journalism when she got that career-ending injury, and she was like before she took up her coaching badges. And I think that is so obvious now that you look at the way she kind of answered those questions. She wasn't getting annoyed by it. She was just controlling the crowd very well, like media trained, and knows what's expected of journalists and responds very well to them. So yeah, I like being in a Slegers press conference. I think she's a delight, personally.
Yeah, it's Jonas also did a bit of journalism as well. Did a little bit of football journalism himself when he was a bit younger. But yeah, I think there's an energy there, and that I like and I enjoy. But I did with Jonas as well. I did like his press conferences. I liked when he dropped a bit of a bomb and he was just a bit spicy, just to like pep things up a bit like the interviews he gave. Like, I think he was a bit box office, and yeah, I don't mind saying like I liked the guy. I warmed to him. So, I guess. And that's the different perspective, right? When you talk to someone in person all the time, like you probably develop a rapport with them, and that's one of the difficulties of the job. It's not a difficult job really, but like having to put that to one side sometimes, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I've liked all of our last few managers as people. The only one I don't mind saying, because enough water's gone under the bridge now. The only one I found genuinely difficult was Shelley Kerr, some 10 or 11 years ago. That was a bit like being told off by a school teacher when you spoke to Shelley. But like Pedro, Joe, Jonas, Renee, liked all of them. Most people are nice people. That's the thing, really. And when you talk to them, you kind of realise it. But like, listen, fans aren't here to have their managers be nice people and be nice to journalists in press conferences. They want results at the end of the day, and Renee's getting them. So, long may that continue. But Jamie, I think we might wrap this one here. Thank you very much, as always.
That was very good fun. Enjoyed it, Tim. Let's see how this big week ahead goes.
Yeah, indeed. The next podcast we do will be the day after the Chelsea game, and that will either be a very fun podcast to do, or it won't be a very fun podcast to do. I'm not sure there's much of a kind of interim solution there, as it were. Although, look, I think probably in October, November, most of us had given up on the league anyway. So maybe you can say there's no pressure or whatever, but I don't know. It feels like, there's going to be all eyes on Arsenal and Renee, I think, here, to see where we are. And let's face it, like, they're not going to have to do a lot to do better than they did in this fixture last season, is what I'll say. And I think we'll leave it there. And thanks as always for listening. And we will be back probably Monday next week with another episode looking back on Arsenal's 3-0 victory at Stamford Bridge. So until then, take care of yourselves, and we will speak very soon.